Good morning. Thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to participate in such a project. So just a couple of seconds of background. I have a son who's 19 years old who has Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which is a progressive muscle weakening, ultimately fatal disease. I've been involved with Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy for about 17 years and have sat on their board for the last 5 or 6 years. Parent Project has done a lot of work around risk-benefit and research projects, but we haven't really looked at the results yet, and it's an interesting question. My son has been participating for the past 13 years in an ongoing drug study. 13 years is ridiculous. We actually have an AdCom on September 28th to go in front of the FDA and maybe get approval. But I've had a lot of experiences from a patient's perspective or the parent of a patient in the pediatric world with drug studies, and the idea about releasing individual results. As I thought about this question, one of the things that came to mind that's changed dramatically in the last 13 years is social media. So when we started the study 13 years ago, your experience with other patients that were going through the same study was very limited. Maybe you saw somebody in clinic that you recognized, or you knew somebody from your community, but that was about the extent of it. Social media has changed that dramatically. At this point, I can open my Facebook at almost any moment and I can see somebody that's interested in or commenting on a result or a symptom or something they're seeing based on a research study. And you can, as a research sponsor, you can talk all you want about how you don't want patients to talk to each other, but that's not realistic any longer. And so I think that the idea of individual research results is much more important, because what happens is these communities very quickly recognize that more than one person is seeing the same thing happening. And so they already know what's happening. And I think it becomes more important that they get accurate information as opposed to really what they're learning on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. Facebook seems to be the most popular in our arena anyway. So I think that's changed dramatically the way research results work. So I have one personal experience I'd like to share. My son was involved in an MRI research study. And interestingly enough, MRI can absolutely identify the loss of muscle in this kind of a progressive disease. Prior to the MR technology, it required a muscle biopsy, and that's just not a practical way to continue to look at somebody's demise. So what they've learned over the last 10 years at the University of Florida in this MR study can absolutely predict when a child will go off their feet, whether or not a child has a more critical path of this disease, or they have a milder form. There's a lot of question about categorizing the disease because they have more information, more natural history. But they don't tell the individual parents, your child has a more severe form, or we think your child's form is more mild, or we know that in the next year you need a wheelchair because this child's not going to walk any longer. And how do you give those results? And what does that do to the family? There's some families that don't want to know. They want to proceed and they want hope, and they don't want to know the future. And there's other families that are all about planning. And if you think about a child that's going into a wheelchair, so suddenly you need to get rid of the stairs in your home. You need to make sure that the community is accessible. You need to go through insurance and purchase a wheelchair. You need to find a way to purchase a wheelchair accessible van. $60,000, $70,000 to transport your child. Those are all things that are really important in the planning process. And if you know, or someone knows, that those sorts of items are needed very soon in the future, is there an obligation to let you know that? I mean, I think these are all really great questions. And then what do you do with the information? So something's found in a research study, who treats your child, or who treats the patient? With the way that insurance works now, we just changed to our 3rd center study in this 13-year odyssey. And the institution had a real concern because they don't accept my son's insurance. Well, you don't need his insurance for the research study, but you do need somebody to treat him if in fact something else is found during that study. So I think these are all questions, and I'm really interested to see what the committee comes up with. I think it's a great question, and thanks for having me.